Lesson 2, 3 is a magic number. This idea of how users are connected is so fundamental that from now on I'm going to draw dots as people and lines as connections without having to sketch the whole thing out. We've already talked about the difference between one user of a piece of software versus 2 users of a piece of software. If 2 or more users have to be connected for the software to be useful, as with, say, WeChat Moments, you would never have a moment just for yourself, then you're looking at social media. But this change keeps going, and it changes very quickly. Because look what happens once you have 3 users. Right? You have 3 possible connections between them, and you start to get effects that you don't get with 2 users. So if this is you, and you're talking to your mother and your friend in a conversation, your mother and your friend are also talking to each other. With 3 people, there is, for the first time, a relationship that exists in the group but that you're not part of and that you have to keep track of. So a group of 3 is considerably more complicated than a group of 2. There are things you might say to your mother that you wouldn't want your friend to hear. There are things you might say to your friend that you wouldn't want your mother to hear. So you have to keep track of who's a member of the group. All of a sudden, there are audience effects as well. And then there is the curious effect of persistence. If you're in this conversation and your mother walks away, but your father joins the conversation, and your friend walks away, but another friend joins the conversation, and then you walk away, and a third friend joins the conversation. There have always been 3 people talking. Is it the same conversation? Yes or no? And the answer is a little bit yes and a little bit no. The conversation actually lasted longer than the participation of any member of the group. There are groups that have been online for so long, back to the 1970s, that although the group is still there, mailing lists to discuss things like science fiction or food, all of the members of the group have changed over. So when you get questions like outside relationships, persistence, and audience effects, you start to see that once groups cross this threshold of 3, they get much more complicated than simply a pair of people talking to each other. This is one of the reasons that social tools on the internet are so much more complicated than social tools like the telephone. The model of talking on the phone was, I'm on the phone, you're on the phone, it's just a 2-way connection. But since the internet allows for group connections, we start to get all of the additional complexity of social media. If you want to see this change in complexity between pairs of people and groups of people, think about the way you use any piece of software that allows you to communicate in both patterns. You can send a message to one other person or to a group of people. Think, for example, about WeChat. You can message back and forth with your friends, your family, your schoolmates, but you can also form groups of those people and kick off group conversations. And yet, as you know, even though the individual people are the same, they're all people in your contact book, you behave differently in groups, and the other members of the group behave differently when they're all talking to each other. So you can already start to see behaviors like groups tend to get funnier. Groups tend to tell more jokes, try and crack each other up. Group threads can get off topic quickly. In part because there are enough members that the complexity changes the way people behave with each other. So the difference between how you communicate with people one-on-one and how you communicate with them in groups is some of the complexity that designers of social media have to think about when they're designing their service.